In 2001, February 2001, I watched the Daytona 500 and I saw my favorite driver, Dale Earnhardt Sr., crash in the final turn before the finish line. And I'd watched NASCAR many times in my youth growing up. I'd seen a lot of wrecks. I'd even been to several races there in Texas. And at that point, it didn't look like it was that bad of a wreck. Didn't really catch my attention, and so I shut it off. I left the house. I ran to church for youth group that night. And then after youth group, I went to a friend's house and hung out over there because we didn't have school the next day. It was President's Day, and so I could stay out late and hang out, and that was a good time. And I remember getting home that night late. It was, whatever curfew I had. I don't remember if it was 11:30 or 12, but I remember getting home and walking in the door and seeing my mom sitting in the living room waiting for me, which was uncommon. And that's when I found out that Dale Earnhardt Sr., my favorite driver, had died in that earlier wreck. Now, this was life before cell phones and social media and the instant news, and I'd gone most of the day without finding out or hearing anything about what had taken place. And as I began to process the bad news, I remember this emotion that started just kind of welling up from deep inside of me. And I began hoping and wishing and maybe even praying that what I was hearing wasn't true. So I went back to my bedroom and I turned on my television and I turned to ESPN and I began watching the coverage that had been going on for hours that I had previously missed. I felt a similar way on August 17th, 2019. It was a Sunday morning, and there was a guy at church who just casually caught me and asked me about an athlete who had died that morning. I didn't know anything about it. I was busy because it was Sunday morning, and so I hadn't seen any news. But the athlete he asked me about was a guy named Cedric Benson. Now, I knew Cedric back in 4th grade PE class. We weren't close friends after that. In fact, I don't know that you could ever say we were close friends, but I knew him. And I knew him especially in high school, not closely, but I knew him. He was the star running back for our high school, and he led our school to 3 straight state championships in Texas and had an incredible collegiate career for the University of Texas. And then, unfortunately, his NFL career was mostly a disappointment, had a few high points mixed in. And Cedric had died that morning, in the early hours, in a horrific motorcycle accident. It was on the front page of the ESPN app when I opened it up. And Cedric was the reason I fell in love with the Longhorns. He was a huge part of some of the best memories I have from my high school years. And the depression kind of started to just set in on that morning, and I found myself hoping and wishing, praying that it wasn't true. There's other moments in life that have actually meant a whole lot more to me than these first two I've mentioned, moments that are more painful or maybe even too personal to get into. I remember moments of getting phone calls that I didn't expect, or unexpected meetings that I found out about last minute that left me without a job, or the many other moments that I've experienced of great disappointment, too painful to mention. Moments where I begged God that that what I was experiencing in that moment wasn't true. But some things in life are true regardless of how you feel. And I bet that you've had those moments too. I bet you've had those moments that shake you to the core, moments where you begin begging God, pleading with God that what you were experiencing were not true. If you haven't had those moments, I bet you will. Sometimes when I read Scripture, I get a similar feeling, and it's not always, and it's not really even all that often, but every once in a while, something that I read in Scripture doesn't sit right with me, and it leaves me hoping and wishing and pleading with a God. Have you ever read something in Scripture and then thought to yourself, I really hope that's not true? We're going to talk about one of those difficult things today. It's Matthew chapter 5, verse 7, where Jesus says, "Blessed are the merciful, for they will be shown mercy." And it looks like, at least at first glance, it looks like what Jesus is saying is that mercy from God is only for those who show mercy. Is that true? Now, the first four Beatitudes that we've looked at the past few weeks could be called exercises of the heart. We've talked about being poor in spirit. We've become mourners of our sin, pursuers of gentleness, and cravers of righteousness. These are all heart issues. These are all things that we deal with within ourselves. These are the things that we work on to be more like Jesus. The rest of the Beatitudes are what a person who has been transformed will begin doing. It's what they'll begin looking like. It's the fruit of doing these first four Beatitudes and then being filled with righteousness, this fourth piece. And so if you would take seriously being poor in spirit, if you would take seriously mourning your sin, if you would take seriously pursuing gentleness and seeking righteousness, if you take those things seriously, then the rest of the Beatitudes become application points. And what you'll find is that righteousness, this righteousness that we're filled with, will cause you to see people differently, and righteousness will cause you to treat people differently. And it won't be convenient to you. There's going to be a part of you that hopes that this isn't true. There's going to be a part of you that wonders if Jesus really meant these things that he said, because the idea of receiving mercy in the same measure that we give mercy could be the kind of thing that keep you up at night. I think this teaching from Jesus was as uncomfortable for Jesus' first audience to hear as it is for us to hear right now. So let's start by making sure that we understand what mercy is. I like linking mercy to the word grace. I found that it's helpful to define the words together. And so we're going to start with grace. Grace could be defined as getting something that you don't deserve, but in a good way. It's getting something you don't deserve. It's kind of like getting a gift after you've been offensive, or someone treating you with kindness after you've been rude to them. It's a reward that you didn't earn or that you get but you thought you had failed. We're told that God gives us grace. He gives us gifts that we don't deserve. God gives us Jesus, who sacrifices himself for our salvation. Salvation is a gift of grace. It's not something that we deserve. It's not something that we could earn. And so grace is getting something that you don't deserve. Mercy is kind of like that, but in the reverse. Mercy is not getting something that you do deserve, but again, in a good way. Mercy is not getting fired when you really, really royally messed something up. Mercy is not getting grounded after you broke curfew. Mercy is your wife not leaving you after you cheated. Mercy is a gift from God of withheld penalties. You deserve punishment because of your sin. You deserve eternal consequences, but you don't get it. And that's mercy. Mercy is really cool to receive, less so to give. And I think it's because intrinsic to the idea of mercy is a lack of deservedness. We struggle with giving someone something that they don't deserve, which is why I think mercy doesn't come naturally to any of us. In Roman society during Jesus' day, mercy was considered a disease of the soul. Mercy was seen as a sign of weakness. Letting someone off the hook was embarrassingly detestable. Mercy was considered an act of weakness because you didn't have the ability to hold someone else accountable for their actions. And because mercy isn't a natural action, that means that it requires some intentionality behind it to make it happen. Practically played out, mercy is a decision that turns into an action and carries an emotion. It starts in the head. It's a decision. And then it turns into an action, and then it carries an emotion. God decided to save us from our sins, which led him to send us Jesus. It was a decision and an action. And it all happened because of his love for us. That is the emotion that is behind all of it. And for us, it's hard to do. But Jesus says there's blessing waiting for those who show mercy. Now, what's interesting to me is the promise part of this beatitude. Blessed are the merciful, the ones who show mercy, for they will be shown mercy. Jesus, kind of in a way, gives us a mathematical equation where mercy received will be equal to mercy given. Essentially, Jesus is saying that God is merciful, and so we should be like that. People who show mercy are acting like God, but also the people who show mercy to others are the ones who get mercy from God. And that's scary to me. And I think if you're going to be honest with yourself and your ability to be merciful, then this should also scare you. You may even join me in hoping that this one isn't true. Because it also feels like Jesus is saying those who aren't merciful won't experience mercy. And if there's any part of you that has come to the right conclusion that you need mercy from God, but you also look at your own life and you recognize your lack of mercy, then I think this verse should terrify you. Because it feels like there's a direct correlation that mercy received is equal to mercy given. The penalties that you withhold from the people in your life become the measure of penalties that are withheld for you from God. Does Jesus really mean that? Is this how God works? One of the recurring themes of Jesus' sermon on the Mount here that we're looking at is the inseparable link between our relationship with God, this vertical relationship that we have with God, and then our relationship with others, the horizontal relationships. And if Jesus was serious, then we can't separate our relationship with God from our relationship with others. They are linked. Jesus repeatedly emphasizes that how we treat others determines how our Heavenly Father will treat us. Over and over and over again, he does this. And beyond that, the New Testament teaches that the way we show our love for God is by how we treat those who are created in his image. We can say we love God, but if we aren't showing mercy to the people around us, if we don't agree with our God and our decisions, and if we don't act out those decisions in God-honoring, practical ways to the people around us, then we aren't loving God. We cannot love God if the mind and the actions don't accompany it. But we don't see it that way. We do everything we can to separate the vertical relationship from our horizontal relationships. We desperately want to believe that we can stand blameless before God and simultaneously despise those who aren't as perfect as we are, right? I think that's what people hate about religion. One of the most malicious traits within religious communities is the mistreatment of others while using God to justify the mistreatment. And it's ugly, and it's despicable, and it looks familiar. It looks like the Pharisees of Jesus' day, which means, and I really don't want you to miss this, but if you aren't comfortable, if you are comfortable praising God while also showing contempt for people, then you look more like the Pharisees who killed Jesus than the disciples who followed him. Anybody uncomfortable yet? Anybody else joining me in hoping that Jesus doesn't mean this one? You should probably know that mercy is just one example of the horizontal relationships that are impacting our vertical relationship with God. In the next chapter, Matthew's Gospel, chapter 6, Jesus is still teaching in the Sermon on the Mount, and we're going to cover this more in a few weeks, but Jesus teaches his listeners how to pray. And in that prayer, there's a very simple line. You probably know it. He says, "Forgive us our debts as we also have forgiven our debtors." And the prayer asks God to forgive us to the extent that we have been forgivers. That's a dangerous prayer. Is there any part of you that hopes Jesus didn't mean that one? Are you comfortable asking God to forgive you to the equal measure in which you have chosen to forgive others? Me neither. But a merciful spirit is evidence that a person has begun to understand and participate in God's mercy, just like a forgiving spirit is evidence that a person has begun to understand and participate in God's forgiveness. Later in Matthew 18, Jesus tells a story of an unmerciful servant. A servant is forgiven a ridiculous amount of money from his master, more money than you could comprehend having, much less owing to someone. But then in the very next scene, this same servant who is generously forgiven begins beating a fellow servant who owed him something significantly smaller. And when the master hears about it, he pulls the first servant back in, he scolds him, and he holds him accountable. And essentially, Jesus says that if there is no mercy from the servant, then there will be no mercy to the servant. And the issue is not that he failed to forgive. The issue is that he remained untouched by the mercy that he had received. And there's more. James 2:13 says, judgment without mercy will be shown to anyone who has not been merciful. Mercy triumphs over judgment. Now, we love the last part of that verse. I love the idea of mercy triumphing over judgment, especially for me. I want that to happen with me and God. But the rest of that verse is awful. No mercy for those who aren't merciful sounds like zero tolerance. James is looking for a merciful spirit as evidence that a person has begun to understand and participate in God's mercy. John says it in an even harsher way. He says, whoever claims to love God yet hates a brother or sister is a liar. Whoever does not love their brother or sister whom they have seen cannot love God whom they have not seen. Anyone who claims to be devoted to God but mistreats the people around them. Anyone who claims to be in a good vertical relationship with God and yet their horizontal relationships are completely messed up. They are a liar. Don't claim God's mercy and yet withhold mercy to others, because I promise you, you don't want God to call you a liar. Now, if you want to get this right, I want you to go back to kind of where we started, what we said about mercy. Mercy is a decision that turns into an action and it carries an emotion. Mercy starts with a decision. It starts in the mind. If you aren't great at mercy, you need to start by remembering the mercy you have received. This is a common theme throughout the New Testament as well. We can love because we've been loved by God. We can forgive because we've been forgiven by God. We can show mercy because we've received mercy from God. And so start by appreciating the mercy that you've received and then put it into action. Forgive when someone doesn't deserve forgiveness. That is mercy. Show kindness when someone doesn't deserve your kindness. That's mercy. Be patient when someone has abused your patience. It's mercy. And it's incredibly inconvenient. And it isn't easy. But it is being merciful. And if you claim to love God, this is how you can prove it. A merciful spirit is evidence that you have begun to understand and participate in God's mercy. It's a weird paradox. We receive mercy from God, and then we're told that the measure of mercy we give out is the measure of mercy we will receive. And essentially, Jesus is saying we get mercy so we can give mercy. We are to reflect the Spirit of Jesus. It's why our horizontal relationships are so important. How we treat others is how we will be treated by God. And so appreciate the mercy that God has given you and then start dishing it out. Now, there's another layer to this. When we talk about love and forgiveness and grace and mercy, we place the emphasis on those horizontal relationships, and rightfully so. Our vertical relationship with God is measured by our horizontal relationships with others. And this beatitude from Jesus absolutely supports this. Everything Jesus is saying is 100% about those horizontal relationships. But sometimes the person we need to love or forgive or grace or mercy is ourselves. And I don't think what I'm about to say fits this beatitude with Jesus' intent. But I do think this is an important conversation and one that fits really nicely with Mother's Day. And it's not that where we're about to go here won't apply to men as well. There's truth for men in everything that I'm about to say. And so men, continue to listen in and learn. But I bet there are some women and mothers in the room who could stand to give themselves a little bit of mercy. And I'm not a mother, but I have a mother And I've been married to a woman for 21 years who's been a mother for 19 years. And I've been in ministry for over 20 years, and I've seen many mothers tend to be better at showing mercy to their own than they are to themselves. And it may not always be true. But I know a lot of women who unnecessarily carry painful burdens against themselves and they won't let go. I'm going to tell you that you need to give some mercy to yourself. A few months ago, I reached out to Sherry Scott. Sherry is the executive director and CEO for Avenues for Women, and she's been a longtime member here at Cap City. Avenues is that ministry that Derek mentioned earlier that we're doing this fundraiser for over the next few weeks. It's a ministry that helped launch, that we as a church helped launch with Sherry years ago, and it's designed to help expectant mothers work through the steps that they can take to bring stability to their lives in the midst of a surprise pregnancy. And she's worked with a lot of women who are trying to figure out what decision to make, and women who are struggling with decisions that they wish they hadn't made. And Sherry knows a lot more about women and their struggle to be merciful to themselves than I could ever know. And here's some things that Sherry helped me think through in her wisdom. She first talked about societal pressures that women are expected to be beautiful and to raise kids and to serve her husband and to carry a full-time job and to volunteer with the PTA, and you'd better do it all with a nice and respectful attitude. Perfection is the expectation, and it becomes a burden that drags women down. And it's not true for every woman, again, but women tend to become fixated on the places that they don't measure up. And we could say, again, a lot of this is the same with men as well, but it doesn't diminish the burden that women carry. On top of the societal pressures, we also struggle with big-time sins that we've had in our life. I don't know what you call them. I've heard them called flinch moments, moments that when you look back, you cringe because of the pain of the failure. And so we cringe when we remember the things that we shouldn't have said, or the decision that hurt my life, or the sin that I was caught in and embarrassed by. And we all have them. But it seems like many women struggle significantly with being forgiven, or forgiving others, or being able to forgive themselves. And so maybe you're a mom who carries the pain of your past. Maybe you're haunted by words that you've spewed to your children. And I say spewed because you didn't say it. It just kind of came out of you. In fact, you were just as surprised to hear those things coming out of your mouth. Or maybe you're haunted about a past, maybe as promiscuity from a time long before you ever had a family, and you carry the pain of those past relationships and the burden that it creates within your current relationships, the ones that you actually now love the most and mean the world to you, and you carry that pain. Maybe you're haunted by a sin within your life that you're trying to keep hidden. And it could be something complex. It could also be something as simple as anger or hatred or bitterness or something judgmental within you. And you know that it's there, and you desperately try to hide it. You know it's wrong, and you pray and you hope that no one else ever finds out just how dark your soul is. Or maybe it's something bigger. Maybe you're the 1 in 4 women in the U.S. who've had an abortion, as statistics suggest, the last few decades. And if you're carrying that, my heart breaks for you. And if that's your story, man, I want you to get help. If you're struggling with showing yourself mercy, reach out to me. Reach out to Avenues for Women. I can help you get in touch with them. In fact, if you're leaving today, grab one of those bottles, and all their contact info is right in them, and you'll be able to go where you need to go. I hope that you can appreciate that there are serious issues that are hurting and haunting women in this room. And on top of all of that, Sherry adds that women are hard on themselves. They tend to be. Many of them beat themselves up when they don't measure up to their perceived expectations, and they tend to hold on to the things longer and to forgive themselves less. And she told me how she can't even count how many times she's heard someone say something like, "I know God forgives me, but I can't forgive myself." And it sounds a little bit like, "I know God has offered me mercy, but I don't think I'm worth it. I don't know how many times I've heard it too. Remember earlier we said mercy isn't natural. In fact, we said mercy is viewed as a weakness, and yet Jesus says we should be mercy givers. How? How can we possibly do something that is so unnatural to us? The reason a Jesus follower can show mercy is because they have understood how much they have received mercy. And some of you in the room need to be reminded of how much mercy you have received from your God. If God has loved you, if He has forgiven you, if He has graced you, if He has been merciful to you, who are you to think that you aren't worth it? To not be a mercy giver to others or even to ourselves is kind of like saying that you don't trust God's solutions, which is maybe a little bit of a twist, but follow me on this. Do you remember on the last night of Jesus' life, He's in the Garden of Gethsemane, and He has some soldiers who show up, and they're going to arrest Jesus, and Peter pulls out a sword, and he tries to protect Jesus. Now, Peter starts something that would likely finish with him dying. But he was willing, because in his mind, he thought he was trying to make things right the best way that he knew how. And yet Jesus steps in and He stops Peter, which I believe is a miracle. Peter's actions should have created a chaos that wouldn't stop until one side was dead. And somehow Jesus stops the whole thing with only one swing of a sword and only one person injured. I think it's as much of a miracle as Jesus calming a storm. He controls the whole situation. And then He heals the man injured by Peter. And then Jesus goes with His captors all the way to the cross, because in that moment, Jesus was trying to fix something much bigger than what Peter could ever imagine. And that's where you are in the story. And it's true for moms, and it's true for dads, and it's true for everyone else. The cross is where Jesus fixes the words that come out of your mouth that you never thought you would hear come out of your mouth. The cross is where Jesus fixes the decisions of your past that replay on loop when you close your eyes. The cross is where Jesus fixes the anger and the bitterness and the hatred that's burning deep within you. The cross is where Jesus makes our biggest regrets become a part of His biggest victories. And the only reason any of us could ever show mercy to anyone, the only reason the concept of mercy makes any sense at all in this world, the only reason that any of us could ever even give mercy to ourselves is because of the mercy that was poured out for us on the cross. Our God is a God of mercy. He's a God who forgives when He has every right to convict us. He is a God who loves us when He has every right to hate us. And then He calls us to do the same. The only reason any of us can show mercy to others or to ourselves is because we understand the mercy we've received, which is a really interesting twist. God gives His active mercy to those who know that they need it, but the way we respond is by giving that same mercy away. It flows into us and out of us to the horizontal relationships around us. We celebrate the mercy we get from our vertical relationship by giving mercy in our horizontal relationships. Mercy is a decision that turns into an action, and it carries with it an emotion. It starts with a mental recognition and appreciation for the mercy that you have received. And then it turns into active mercy for the people around you. We said this a few times throughout this series, but agreeing with God is a good place to be. Thinking the way that God thinks is a blessed place to be. Doing the things God does is a blessed place to be. And as hard as this verse is, and as much as I may not like it, as much as it may not make sense to you, as much as I may read this and at times pray, God, I hope this isn't true. Jesus says the merciful are blessed. And so be merciful to others and be merciful to yourselves, and you will be shown mercy.